Surge. What the hell is it? Everybody is saying sci-fi Dark Souls, robot Dark Souls. What is it?
It's robot Dark Souls.
Is
It's
it?
tech Dark.
Is it as
Okay,
challenging as Dark Souls?
so the Surge is a new Souls-like. I'm just gonna call them Souls-like.
Okay.
If you've never played a Dark Souls or a Bloodborne game, they're ultra hard games, third-person action. The developer who made this, not Focus Home Interactive, because that's the publisher. Team 13, Deck 13. They made Lords of the Fallen. If you own an Xbox One and you have for like maybe I want to say 6 or 7 months, I believe it's been a Games with Gold free. So you might have played it, you might have not. But what this game is, it's a game where it's a world. They don't tell you a lot about the narrative, which is very Souls-like. You're kind of just dropped in the world. You get a brief introduction. There's a company called Creo. Think of them as Google or Apple. You know, it's a big company, and they talk about how they're going to use augmentation and different machineries to return the Earth to its former glory, and that's all you kind of really get. So you have this introductory sequence, which is really really cool, for a very specific reason, and I won't spoil it because it gives away the whole entire coolness of that beginning sequence. But you're very quickly, put into the suit, and then your guy just kind of awakens in a pretty crappy landscape. It looks not deserted, but it looks beat down. Something's obviously wrong. And from there on, you just kind of explore the areas as you go, learning the lore of what happened, what Creo was standing for, who you are, what went wrong in these facilities. But yeah, basically the game is, if you took Dark Souls, made it a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's easier for newcomers to pick it up. I'm not going to say it has a giant tutorial, but as far as progression, it's much more lenient to people who haven't played Souls games before. There's obviously ways you'll know you're progressing and stuff like that, but at its core, it's a very difficult third-person action game. Use melee weapons, and enemies can kill you in 1 or 2 hits. But yeah, it's tech Dark Souls.
So it's the actual melee part of it, and how dangerous and vulnerable you are is still up there in the Souls category. But what's easier is more of the accessibility of the world and the path you're supposed to take.
Yeah, so the way that Dark Souls games kind of work is they're very large. You can also usually access 3 or 4 different areas from one hub. The first Dark Souls that I played, I ended up in a zone that I was not supposed to be in till way later.
Took the wrong turn.
Exactly. The way that the Surge does their thing is that each there's no map. Okay, there's no map. There really shouldn't be. But each area is kind of self-contained. There's kind of no real distinguishing features between the areas. It's all kind of just like, pipes, and there's like a bio lab and a cargo bay and a warehouse. It's very all industrial and stuff like that. But you'll start off in what's called the operations base. It's a bonfire. That's where you change out your gear if it needs to be changed. Some of them can be swapped on the fly. It's where you deposit your they're called tech scraps in this game, but they work just like Souls do in other games. For defeating enemies, you get points,
but they make more
experience
sense.
points. Exactly, and if you die before getting back to the base, you lose those points and then have to re-pick them up. But those points can be used to upgrade weapons, upgrade armor, and upgrade your character level. The reason I say it's more inviting for newcomers is there's not a whole lot of stuff besides that. When you look at Dark Souls, you have so many different statistics, luck, health, all this. Really, the Surge comes down to what armor pieces you're able to craft. You find blueprints and stuff like that. Getting the pieces to craft these items are very easy because when you're fighting enemies, it is very Dark Souls. You'll lock on. You do. It's more like Bloodborne. You'll do horizontal swipes, vertical swipes. You can charge them up. There's some dodging and stuff like that. But what this game has that other Souls games don't have is it has a limb lock feature. So you'll lock onto a character, and then you can identify if I want to type, the left arm, the right arm, the left leg, the head, the body. Some of these pieces might be armored. Some of them might not be. If you attack an armored piece, you're not going to do as much damage. But if you do enough damage to the piece, you have the opportunity to cut it off with a finishing move. Cutting it off will yield that piece. Yeah. So if you get an enemy down to low enough health, you'll get this little a little text box. It's either a square or an X, depending on if you're playing on PlayStation or Xbox or PC something. And then you'll just, do some cool swipe with whatever weapon you have, because you can have multiple weapons, two-handed, one-handed.
And then does that finish off the one limb or them completely?
It finishes them off completely. So doing a finishing move will kill them for sure, but it doesn't always necessarily drop that limb piece. But if it does, what you can do is you have that in your inventory. And the thing about this is that you don't lose any of the stuff in your inventory. If you die, you only lose your souls. So any scraps you pick up that give you souls upon consuming them, kind of like there's that kind of stuff in Dark Souls. Those stay with you, schematics, pieces that you picked up.
Right.
But when you knock off those limbs, you take them back to the operations base, put them in the gear kind of crafter, and they break them down into components. So getting new components is very easy. You just have to cut off the limbs. But the main thing is how they set up the levels. So like I said, each area is its own area. It'll always be punctuated with a boss fight, okay? And you start off and you'll be at your operations base, and then you kind of just follow the natural path. There isn't too many paths where you can lose yourself, but there's always like 2 or 3 ways you can go. But it's always labyrinthian, meaning you'll progress a certain amount, and then you'll find a shortcut that leads you back to operations. The thing I like about it is the shortcuts are actually really smartly hidden. If you know where all the shortcuts are, you can't access them, but you can see them. And so you'll always kind of just pop out of a crevice and you'll be like, oh, I'm back at operations. So
okay.
You'll find 3 or 4 shortcuts. That way you can go back to the base and level up your guy and run around, and you explore the whole area. And then eventually you'll meet the boss. You kill the boss, and then you take a train to the next area. You're always just kind of following either a person. There's not a lot of people around. There are people that you meet up with and you'll rescue and stuff. But you're always kind of just trying to figure out what's going on, and you'll beat a boss and you'll move on to the next thing.
What are the bosses like?
So that's my biggest issue with this game, is that the bosses are very underwhelming. When you look at Souls games, and if you look at Lords of the Fallen, the bosses in Lords of the Fallen weren't necessarily as artful in their design. I think that's a big reason as to why the Souls bosses are so cool. Besides their scale, is they're often really, really well done. There's really unique standout points about them. Lords of the Fallen didn't have crazy good design, but the way the boss fights carried out were usually, you have to do something unique to fight this guy. You can't just cheese it. What I found, I fought 2 of the bosses. The first one was a giant mech that jumped around and could swing at me really fast, and I killed him in 2 tries. The game is very difficult too. If you've played like Dark Souls, it's a little bit more difficult than Bloodborne, but only in the combat. It can be cheap at points. But I was able to kill the first boss in like 2 tries, and then the second boss was another big robot that could fly around fast. But this one had spinny. I hit my mic. Had spinny arms and stuff. Beyond that, I can't remember. I think the first boss was called Pax, P-A-X. I don't remember the second boss's name. It's not really that doesn't pop up and it's like, here's the Pax monster and it's super defining and stuff. It's just kind of like a big mech robot that you'll hit at a few times. You maybe focus on a certain limb or something, and that's about it. I really wish that the art design on the bosses and the character design was more varied and better, and that kind of goes across the whole entire art style. I don't want to say that the art of this game is bad. It's just very one note. Enemies, you look at a Dark Souls game or any sort of fantasy Souls game like Lords of the Fallen, you're fighting rabid dogs, you're fighting gargoyles, you're fighting giant hulking dudes. In this, you're really fighting people, I think, because they don't explain it. I'm still halfway through the game. People who are augmented, but they're always usually just normal 5-6 foot people who are augmented. Some of them have dual blades. Some of them have guns they'll shoot. But the enemy design is always the same. Give or take maybe 2 or 3 classes of characters, and then to that same thing, the art design is kind of it's very metallic, it's very industrial. You see a lot of pipes. It's a very colorful game, so I'll give it that. There's a lot of color to it. The lighting effects are good, but texture wise, it's decent. It's not the best looking thing I've ever seen, and the art direction is a little bit stale after a while, but it holds up. I'm a fan of Souls games. I like Bloodborne quite a bit. I've never really found myself pushed through them. I've never completed a Souls game. I might have beaten Demon's Souls. But for some reason, the Surge, whether it's just the combination of combat, the fact that I found a weapon that I like, and a combo that just destroys enemies, and it's not too difficult for me, whatever the reason. It's so you can choose from a variety of different weapons. Like I said, you have one-handed, you have one rigged, two rigged. They're different categories, and as you fight with them, you get proficiency in it, which allows you to use, upgrade them, use better versions of them, et cetera, et cetera. I played around with this like two-handed dual, like really fast, sharp strike thingy. Imagine like punchy gloves or like Rock'em Sock'em Robots with blades in them. I tried that for a little while, but found that I liked the versatility of a one-handed blade kind of thing. And whether it's because each weapon kind of the weapons are different beyond their categories. A weapon in a one-handed weapon could be different than another one-handed weapon in the special moves they do. Each move, like you hold down a horizontal strike, you hold down vertical strike, each weapon will have its own kind of power moves. So the one I use is kind of like a red chainsaw kind of thing, and if I hold down vertical strike at the right way, I can kind of pop them up and then finish them off with a horizontal swipe or two. It works for most enemies, and the thing also that's good about this game, at least in its leniency, is if you've played other Souls games, you have your potions, and those are a finite amount. You might have 3 before you have to return to base. This game, you find implants that you can augment yourself with, and they'll give you standard things like more health based on your level, more stamina based on your level, finishing moves will return health. But there's one implant in particular where you can use charge as health, and what charge is it's just a meter that fills up that you get for successfully hitting enemies. So most of my battles, I'll just cheese them and they might get a hit off on me, but I have the implants kind of installed so I get more charge per hit. And by the time I'm finished with just one kind of cannon fodder enemy, I'll have enough charge where I can fully heal myself and not have to use any med kits.
Oh, okay.
So there's a lot of options on kind of how you want to spec yourself out. If you want to be very tanky, want to have a lot of stamina, but having an option that lets you use essentially another stamina bar for health is really, really, really good, especially when that bar depletes pretty quickly outside of combat.
Yeah, when I think of Souls games and Bloodborne games, what keeps me pushing through them is, I guess, the wonder, like you're saying, with the variety of enemies.
Yeah,
it always feels like there's something new and crazy being thrown at you, and just the different areas, and that feeling that, like watching a David Lynch movie, this will all get explained at the end, I bet.
So, and that's the thing; it never does. But
yeah, but so what's compelling you to keep playing this? Is it just the gameplay? Is it the challenge? Is it the story, the lore? You
hit it right on the head with that. That Dark Souls is a lot about wonder. You always wanted to see the next thing because the areas are so cool. Giant chapels, haunted woods, swamps. Crazy variety. It's definitely not the art. It's definitely not wondering. But I don't care what the third boss is because I'll beat him in 3 or 4 tries and he's not going to be interesting. Maybe he will be. And this is why I'm not going to pass a final judgment until I finish with the game. Because in my first 15 hours, my first 10 hours, I was like, wow, this is really, really, really good. But I didn't give myself enough time to realize that the art is a little bit, like I said, one note, a little bit stale at points. So my opinion has come down. But when I think about that, I was like, what is it about this game that's drawing me into it more so than maybe even a Dark Souls game, which is heralded as being much, much better, the staple of the genre. And I think it's both a mixture of the narrative, the fact that they drop you in without telling you much. But the thing is, when they tell you stuff, it's usually told by a person you'll meet who'll be like, oh man, these people came in and did this. So the Dark Souls thing about like, I hope they explain all of this. Dark Souls is usually very vague. You have to do a lot of inference. There's a lot of symbolism. The Surge is I don't want to say it's a very basic story, but it's a story that it makes sense as it goes. You feel like you're learning information, and it's not super interesting, but it's interesting enough to push me forward. And I think the thing that really does it for me is I know with the Surge that if I put my head against it hard enough, that I will be able to do it, because there's never a question of, am I underleveled for this? Am I not supposed to be here? Am I taking on an enemy that's very, very difficult that I shouldn't be at this point? It does a very good way of directing you through the level. You'll notice, there's places I can come back. But I think the thing that really brings me back to it is the fact that you can play it in short bursts because, like I said, each area has about 4 or 5 shortcuts that'll lead you back to the main base. So last night I played through the entirety of Area 2, and then I played the first area, and I was like, I kind of want to check this out. So I ran through the area, and I was dying a bunch of times, but I found my first checkpoint, my first shortcut that would allow me to go deeper into the level without having to go through all the enemies and stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. I explored the beginning portion of this area. I'm back. I found myself a shortcut. I can turn it off for the night and come back. And I think that Dark Souls is often so big and doesn't doesn't allow that. You find bonfires and stuff in Dark Souls, and there's a very forward progression, but it doesn't feel like you're ever stopped and you're good. It always feels like you have to move on because the game is very tense. The Surge, when you find these shortcuts, you feel like I've made progression. I have figured out this area, and the amount of kind of exploration you have to do to find these shortcuts is significant, but the level design is very well done. You never feel like you're lost. You never feel like you don't know where you're at. So the fact that the level design is good, the gameplay is sound, the combat is fun, it's easy to play. It's not easy. It's easy to play, very hard difficulty-wise, but it's not difficult in the controls. I think it's just a good combination of a decent narrative intrigue, a good gameplay loop that rewards you more than a Dark Souls game does. It has the challenge, but it also has much more of a reward in both what you understand and your overall progression. I don't think that's the main thing. You use your souls to level up your guy, right, to increase your core power, and that allows you to add extra implants, allows you to do different gear. I don't know if that boosts my stats at all, but I feel accomplished when I raise my core level, regardless of if it increases my stats, because I feel like I've done something. I feel like I've made a tangible difference, and I can be like, wow, I did a piece of thing in this game. In Dark Souls, it feels like you're on a constant battle just through the game until you finish it, whereas the Surge is good about rewarding you little bits here and there.
Well, I think that was the design and the intent of Miyazaki's games with Souls and Bloodborne, is he always wants you to feel a little off balance and a little bit tense, and that's not for everybody. And I'm like you, I've never actually finished a Souls game or Bloodborne. I've really enjoyed them. I've started them and had this full head of steam. Demon Souls, I got lost when I first bought it. Dark Souls 3 I was really excited for with all the hype. Bloodborne I think I enjoyed the most purely. But yeah, they had some really great sort of like circling back and very intuitive level of design as well. So you're 20 years, not 20 hours into this.
Yeah, I'm somewhere between 17. When I finished the boss last night in the end of the second area, I was about 17 hours, and I don't know how. I'm at least 20 hours in. The thing is, when you're using that train to take you from an area to another area, you do get an overview of the map, and there's 6 areas by my count. There's 3 of them that are smaller, and 3 of them that are significantly large. Those are the beginning areas. So I'm assuming I'm going to start heading into the smaller areas that might be more difficult. I'm not sure if it's just 6 areas and that's it, but I would judge based upon how far I've come that I don't have too much longer. I'm going to say, depending on difficulty, this game will probably run you 35, 40 hours. The reason I say that, though, is because you start at level 1, right? And you use your souls to upgrade. I'm at level 39, and in the very beginning of the game, that's something I completely forgot to talk about. So as you're progressing through these areas, the thing about souls is that you're always like, am I going in the right direction, or am I heading towards my death? And the thing that the Surge does well is you'll see these stations, right? They're like green little boxes. They're green little computer screens, and you use your level, your character level, to overcharge them and supply power or unlock a door. So you'll often see, there's maybe 10 or 12 of these in the area. So you always kind of know, like, oh, there's a green switch. I'm in the right area. I'm heading in the right direction. And like I said earlier, you can tell when some things have to be returned later. In the very first area, you see one of those computer screens. Normally it says like 10 or level 13 or 14. This one said level 55, right? And that's far. I'm level 39, so I'm assuming that the 55 is New Game Plus or End Game content you have to come back to. So I can't imagine that this game is going to run me more than another 15 hours. Dark Souls games and those kind of games, I feel like those really have a lot of options as far as replayability, because you have the online, you have there's the New Game
Lots
Plus.
Of different play styles.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the Surge is very much one kind of thing. You're never fighting a ton of enemies at once. You might fight maybe 2 or 3 enemies at the most at one point. At one point, I fought a group of 4 or 5 enemies, and I got an achievement for it. So it's very much a one-on-one thing. When I look at it, I feel like it plays like kind of how For Honor tried to play, but better, if that makes sense. Okay. For Honor feels like it has a lot of weight to it. The Surge has the limb locking, and each kind of fight, since they're mostly one-on-one, feel like a kind of battle of like, I'm going to attack your left leg and dodge out of this way, and it feels very strategic, but it doesn't feel heavy to do. If you make a mistake, you're okay. So I like the combat in that. Oftentimes with Dark Souls, it's a lot about rolling out of the way, hitting them, rolling out of the way again, hitting them, and just doing what you can. In this, I feel like it's much more a battle of, I'm going to hit your left leg and then kind of tink at that for a little bit, unless, like I said, you have a combo that cheeses enemies. But I think the combination,
it feels like more of a duel rather than Dark Souls is scrambling for your life and counterattacking.
There might be an occasional moment where you're trying to fight somebody and then some guy has a plasma rifle. He's kind of shooting at you from far away. But for the most part, it's usually like approach this enemy, defeat him, come around the enemy or around the corner. Here's another guy. Maybe he'll have a different weapon. It doesn't feel super overwhelming. So I think it's the combination of the somewhat interesting narrative, the limb lock system that kind of makes it more like a duel, and just the overall fact that there's enough shortcuts where you don't feel like you're really going to be completely screwed. There's quite a few points in the second area where I didn't throw my controller, but I was like, are you serious? There's a few issues where you might go after an enemy and then you'll fall through like a little thing on the floor and fall to your death. There was one part where there was like a conveyor belt underneath me. I'm standing on like a ledge here, and there's a conveyor belt underneath me just going, and I see like an item or something, and I hop down on the conveyor belt, and it's a void area, and I die. Okay. But it's like literally like 3 or 4 feet. So some of that is kind of annoying, and you might fall off the map without realizing it maybe once or twice. But that's it. I'd say the biggest and most significant thing that I can bring up about it being negative is just the lack of inspiration in the art style and the enemy design. But gameplay wise, I think the Surge is really, really good for people who are interested in Dark Souls but don't think they're good enough for it. Because at the very base, this will introduce you to the genre, the way it plays, and it's a good jumping off point, because I think if you play the Surge before you play Dark Souls, you'll feel more comfortable with all the options that Dark Souls has. You'll feel like you have a more basic understanding, because once you understand how a game like this plays, kind of how the reward progression works out, whether or not you should go back to base or continue on, because returning to base respawns all the enemies, so you have this risk-reward thing. I think it's really, really well done, and I think it's a good introduction to the genre. I just don't think it's a staple of the genre. It's good. I just don't think it's great.
All right. It ends up being a bit more positive than I thought this game was going to.
Well, me too. It surprised me. I Lords of the Fallen I was keen on, and then I kind of abandoned it. But I think the fact that it's not overtly vague, it's descriptive enough that you understand what you're doing. A lot of Dark Souls is often like, I don't know what I'm doing, where I'm supposed to be going. I'm just kind of playing it and enjoying it. This feels a little bit more focused in that, and I think it does a lot for it. I think if they make a Lords of the Fallen 2, or maybe the Surge 2, or maybe another IP that allows them to do some more inventive things with the character designs, you might see these guys, Deck 13, really, really, really pushing the envelope and doing more than imitating. I say that these developers have the capacity to make an excellent Souls-like game that is just as good as, like, Dark Souls 2 isn't that great. I could see them making a better Souls game than Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls 3 is what I'm saying. There's definitely potential here, and I think that anybody who likes these kind of games will see it and enjoy it. And a newcomer who might not have played the genre, it's a good introduction. Stick with it. It can be a little bit, like any Souls game, it can be a little bit difficult to get into for the first 2 or 3 hours, but once you get a decent hold on it, you'll have a bit of fun. It's definitely a worthwhile game. It's not as garbage as I thought it was going to be.
Not as garbage. Sounds like a glowing review. All right, well, that is going to do it here. You can find our stuff at a90skid.com.
Yeah, you can. You can check out, I know this will be going up on embargo. Hopefully the review will be up, so if you want to read the full text review, I usually do pretty in-depth text reviews. You can find that on 90skid.com. And if you want to get
what was your last review, the one that was like 20,000 words?
Oh, the 2,400 worder, Prey.
That was great. I loved it. Great review.
Well, you know what? The whole reason I did that is because everybody was saying, oh, don't trust Prey reviews if they come out early because, you don't have enough time to play it. Yeah. And I thought that the only rebuttal to that is, okay, there's way too much to read. This guy obviously played enough to have formed an opinion. So most of my reviews are not that lengthy. But when it comes to a game like Prey and games that are that in-depth, sometimes they deserve a novel.
That's treatment. A good strategy with school, too, because teachers are overworked and tired. So if you write a lot, they'll just give you a better mark.
And they'll be like, it's all right. He knows what he's talking about. Guys, it's just a bunch of garbage written sentences. I'm kidding. It's pretty good writing. You should check it out. Matt does some awesome stuff, too.
I write some stuff. I wrote about why I don't want a PS4 Pro.
Your best article that you ever did, your best video you ever did was your review of the Xbox controller.
Oh, man.
Under your other persona of PS4 fan.
The problem was that a lot of people didn't realize it was a joke.
It was a joke.
Well, it was like a parody, and I I put it on N4G because most of the comment section is filled with people that are just like that. So I can understand why they wouldn't recognize it. But the funny thing is that after playing with the Xbox One controller on my PC for so long, then I went back to the PS4.
You like it more?
This is better.
Dude, I'm telling you. Yeah, dude, I'm saying the 360
fits my hand perfectly.
The DualShock 2 or the PS2 controller was fantastic. I liked it quite a bit. The DualShock 3 was okay. I think the DualShock 4 is just
the DualShock 3 controller is really loud because it always sounds like you're gonna break it. It's always like
I think the DualShock 4 is a more solid version of the DualShock 3.
It's solid. It's a little too wide, and I feel like the legs on the bottom and the right push out so far that I never feel like I can just grab it completely and still touch the shoulder buttons properly. I feel like I always kind of have it out extended from my hands.
I also have a weird thing of the double analogs being right here. I mean, this feels better to me when I'm aiming, especially with first-person shooters. This throws me off too much. I can deal with it. I like the PS4 controller or any Sony controller, any Sony D-pad for fighters, I should say. But then again, the Xbox D-pad on the 360 controller after they fixed it wasn't terrible either. Here's a thing. Okay. Let's do this real quick.
Yeah.
What's your favorite controller?
I think for innovation, the Super Nintendo controller was pretty outstanding. Because the Super Nintendo controller came up with the 4 face buttons that every controller uses now.
You're right.
And the shoulder buttons, and it was super comfortable.
I'm gonna say, as far as innovation goes, the N64 controller, because it introduced triggers.
But no, it's the Super Nintendo, buddy.
No, not the triggers. I mean the Z trigger.
But you were still doing that with the L button on the Super Nintendo.
Also the analog stick. And I really like the. There's some faults to it. That's why I'm saying for innovation. Like I didn't like the C buttons didn't work that great for a camera. But I would say best overall controller. Oh, probably the 360 controller, dude. Like the 360 controller is really good. I like the Xbox One controller a lot.
Yeah, you're not biased at all. Your podcast used to be exclusively about 360.
Everything Xbox 360 podcast. That's what it used to be called. Can you believe that name? Yes, fucking terrible. Then we changed it to everything Xbox.
Yeah, the Xbox controller is... I like how a little more narrow it is. It fits in my hand nicely. What I don't like about this controller is it's very clicky. The L1 and R1, or whatever you call them, bumpers.
Yeah, they're clicky.
I really hate that they click. They feel really, really cheap. And the D-pad is too clicky.
I would say that the Xbox One controller is decent. You know what? Maybe PS2. Because here's the thing: is that I come off as an Xbox guy because that's when I started getting into my gaming journalism. Started my podcast 10 years back and stuff like that when I was like 15 or 16. That's when I bought a 360. But before that, I did not have, like, I had an original Xbox, and I'm sure we should do a video about that someday.
We will.
I had an original Xbox, and I was cool into it, but I was much more a PlayStation 2 guy. I owned an Xbox and a PlayStation 2, but kind of how I am now with my Xbox One and my PS4.
Yeah.
I played the PS2 way more, and the Xbox just for exclusives like Halo and like whatever BioWare's Knights of the Old Republic, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of flipped. The tables have turned. Maybe it was the 360. So
see, I went for the Xbox because everybody had a PS2, and I think my brother had one, and all my friends had one. So I thought the Xbox to me felt more like future-proofed because it had more power. It had
the Xbox. The original Xbox was a beastly console.
I like that it had sort of like a dashboard and an XMB ahead of the time. It felt like you could rip CD tracks onto it. You could mod it more easily, and it had that really cool sort of that like green UI. There's some cool YouTube videos with the completed long Xbox system music, and if you leave it on for a while, it gets like very alien and very odd. A lot of horrifying sounds. It sounds really cool.
I mean, the Xbox was, I think, it had some attitude when it came out. We'll do an Xbox. We'll do an Xbox.
Whereas the PS2 is extremely utilitarian.
Yeah, PS2 was a DVD player, really.
But that was a fantastic era because the PS2 was you just saw games that would come out and they would be cheap. There was this like wide range in pricing. It was like how Steam is now.
Yeah.
And you just have an odd game and it'd be 8 hours long. Games didn't have to. Now every game that's AAA is 40 hours long.
I think the PS2 was the most closest thing to the Atari, where you saw like not developers just developing shovelware shit for it, but you saw lower developers. It was kind of like you said, it's the retail equivalent of Steam. You know, you had your AAAs, you had your Black, your SOCOM, your Call of Duty, Big Red 1 or whatever. But then you also had, you know, smaller games, and it allowed a lot of genres to thrive. You know, you had a lot of JRPGs, you had a lot of Western RPGs. It was a very, very heavy system.
And just like brand new genres, Katamari Damacy.
Yeah,
a lot of strange games could live on there because they could take a chance on games because the install base was so large. They had a much better chance of making their money back.
Nintendo couldn't. They always had a faulty relationship with third party, and the Xbox was so behemoth and it was such a big thing that developing for it was a whole nother beast. Retro games are fun. Have you been playing anything else this week? I mean, I've been playing a whole lot of Surge. I did a review on Butcher, which was a fun little game.
Yeah.
Cat cameo. Studio Cat.
Not a nice cat. This cat will bite you. I've been playing Final Fantasy IX.
Dude, hell yeah. How far are you?
I'm on disc 3.
Who's your favorite final? Who's your favorite fantasy character?
Ooh. I like Aiko, and I like Dagger's story. I like the growth that she does. Dagger's pretty cool. He grows a little bit too. Actually, but then Vivi's his quest to find out what it is to be alive, and his history and how his life just seems so unfair.
Final Fantasy IX had some pretty good stories. I don't think the characters were as iconic as some other ones. Like, you know, got a Squall or Cloud or shit. Right? Squall isn't 9.
Squall's 8. But,
Squall's 8. Okay. Sorry, Final Fantasy is not my favorite.
Like the first 2 discs of 9, I was rocketing through. I loved it. I thought the story was great. And then it really kind of died. And then they bring in...
It's the anti-6. 6 is like kind of for a little bit, and then the fucking mid-twist just throws you through a loop. 9 is kind of the opposite.
Well, 9, as soon as they kind of shift directions, and all of a sudden the queen isn't the bad guy or girl, and then there's another evil character, so like this kind of like female knight, and then there's Kuja, kind of brought in at the end. And then when you're kind of getting to know Kuja, and I'm visiting Kuja in the palace, he's just so over the top, like, ha ha ha, now you're here. And also, I don't really understand... Like, I just got to the point where he's talking to Zidane in the palace and is forcing Zidane to go do something. And it's not really explained why he would do it. Zidane's just going to go do it. And
it's JRPG stuff, man.
Yeah, but it's I don't think that's a good enough excuse because there were such great stories. That's what these games are great at. And also,
it's the whole reason that JRPGs and Eastern games in general bug me is because the stories they weave are so good, but I hate how much exposition and how often. The same reason I don't like anime that much. They beat your head over. Yeah. They beat the audience's head over and over with the most obvious stuff, and then just vague on the things you're interested in. Like there's so much exposition, so much repetition in their storytelling. It's kind of annoying at certain parts.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about Andromeda. Everybody just says everything that happens. They say it 3 times. So I'm kind of grinding my way through it at this point because I'm really hoping that it'll turn around. And I've put so much time into it. I'd like to see the ending.
How many hours you got on that bad boy?
Well, on my Vita, I fall asleep a lot with it on. But I think right now I'm at like 60 hours or 70 hours or something.
That would make sense. That's a rough
You know
estimate.
what I really miss is with Final Fantasy VII on the PS4, that version, you can go 3 times speed.
Oh, yeah, because it was the PC port, and that shit was cracked out. I can't wait for them to release Final Fantasy VII Remake in the year 2040.
What the hell is that going to be?
It's just going to be Final Fantasy VII remade into episodic, and it'll be not as good as everybody wanted it to be, and they'll be completely disappointed, and I'm calling it now. Sorry, guys. It's either going to be a super big disappointment or a fucking masterpiece.
I think it's going to be like The Phantom Menace. When it first comes out, everybody's going to be so excited.
Fuck yeah! And then like 5 years later, they're going to be like, you guys know the remake was shit, right? Like, no one likes that.
But who wants to play Episode 2? The best part of Final Fantasy VII is the opening, the reactor, Midgar, the slums, meeting all the characters.
I'll buy like the first episode, and then I'm good. You know?
Yeah, because the game has kind of a saggy middle, and then it picks up again in the third act. I think it's become pretty trendy to hate on Final Fantasy VII, but I think it's fucking great.
I like Final Fantasy VII a lot. It's not my final fantasy. It's not my favorite fantasy game, but it's definitely up there. I think it's really, really good. It's well earned.
What's your favorite FF?
6, man. No, 15. Lightning Returns. 13-2. I don't know. Probably 6.
It's funny
Close.
about how he's. I mean, that is like a joke. Oh yeah, obviously no one would like 13 or that whole trilogy.
I liked. I liked.
I've written a few articles of like and even just casually referencing 13 as a bad game. There are some very staunch supporters that will
Oh, there's
come at your
any Final
throat.
Fantasy game, dude. Any fucking, you could be like, "Hey, Final Fantasy 13 Versus is terrible," and they're like, "It was the best thing ever." You're like, "It's Final Fantasy 15. It never came out."
Yeah,
People love Final Fantasy for no reason. 13, I bought into the hype. The problem with 13 is that it was a goddamn hallway up until 50 hours in when they actually opened the game. Problem with 15 is that they didn't finish the game.
yeah.
I'm
Like
waiting on them
a
to finish.
pretty drastic tonal shift in that game in
Yeah,
15.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
they only had 10 years.
Yeah, only 10 years to finish it off. What are they going to make? Duke Nukem Forever? That was a masterpiece. I played The Butcher. No,
Uh-huh.
it's just called Butcher. Butcher is great, guys. It's awesome. It's really, really good. It was an indie at Xbox game. It's we're talking like low indie. You know, this ain't your indie darling. This ain't no Jonathan Blow shit. This is that gritty, the real indie. It's an homage to Doom and Quake, and very much Doom first off. The music is very Doom. I would say the theme music is really Doom. You know, you have your chunky guitar riffs with some cool techno on top of it, very MIDI. The thing is, it's not a first-person shooter. It's a 2D kind of, think Super Meat Boy. It's a very difficult. The first thing you see when you start up the game before the title screen is Butcher. The hard or the easiest mode is hard, which is actually a lie. There is a casual mode, but it's very, very fast paced. You just cycle through weapons. You use right trigger to shoot, left trigger to jump. That's kind of all there is. You just go through the levels. There's no key cards you have to collect. You just kind of progress through the level.
And it's
There
all
might be
two-dimensional?
It's all 2D. It's very old school pixel art. Like
Is it very
intentionally.
is there a lot of vertical movement and vertical
Yes.
level scaling and all that?
Yeah. So like each level, instead of it being kind of like a maze, you know, you can jump up, you can go through through the ground and stuff like that. It's very small. So that's what I meant to say is like your character himself is maybe 12 pixels because the screen is big and there's a lot of detail. That's because the maps are very, you know, they're very big and there's a lot of room to move around and stuff.
Is there a lot of platform movement, or is it more focused
Yes.
on shooting?
Well, it's a lot of platform movement mixed with shooting. It's like those two things combined. I wouldn't say there's a lot of platform difficulty. Like there's no platforming sections where you're going to really have to watch and make sure. It's a lot of using platforming as positional movement and then kind of, you know, peppering them with the different weapons you have as you grab them. You get some cool upgrades as you go. The enemies are pretty lacking in variety. There's kind of like 3 enemy types, if I remember right. You know, they shoot different things, and that's cool. But the thing is, the game is short. It's like 3 hours long, maybe 3 to 4 hours, depending on if you have a difficulty with it or what you spend on. I found the first world very, very easy. It's each world is kind of comprised of 5 levels. It's very, very linear. You know, you're on the space station. There's really no story. Even in Doom, they were like, you're in hell or on Mars. In Doom or in this, there's not a lot of story. You're on some derelict space station, and then you'll go to the first world, and then you beat the 5 levels, and then you blow up the world, and you did it, and then you go on to the next one. There's about 5 worlds, and then a boss, and then you're done. And you can play on bigger difficulties, but it's very much just about the challenge of the game. It's cheap too. I think it's like $10. It's really good. If you like side-scrolling action games, if you like shooting games, you know, where you're moving the stick a lot and it's like about reflex and timing, you like it a lot. If you're a fan of the aesthetic of Doom, you know, the sound, the look, the gore, the violence, it's very bloody. I'm not gonna say it's gory because doesn't have enough detail to be gory, but it's very bloody. You know, enemies get gibbed all over the place. So if you're a fan of Doom and you have $10 and you like action games and you're looking for a little bit of challenge, I highly, highly recommend it. It's very, very good.
It's funny to think of that as taking Doom and making it two-dimensional, because
yeah.
before Doom there were a lot of games that were these platformer shooters like Biomenace,
Commander Keen, stuff like that.
the first Duke Nukem,
Yeah,
before
okay,
Duke
so it's
Nukem
like
3D.
it's like Duke Nukem if you pulled Duke Nukem's camera out about 6 times and made him
Okay.
super tiny and then made him very fast. It's like that,
Like you
but
said, Super Meat Boy. Okay.
yeah, it's like that. But Super Meat Boy is more about the platforming. I only
Right.
say that in the perspective of how things look,
Right,
you know, in
yeah.
the pixel. Yeah. It's really good. You wouldn't be able to tell looking at the tile. It kind of looks a little bit. It looks low budget. At looks at the screens, but that's because the game isn't about how pretty it looks. It's all about the music, the atmosphere, and kind of the play style. It's really a game. It's a kind of game that reinforces that a solid gameplay arc or just a fun kind of gameplay mechanic or whatever you call it will carry a game for as long as it needs to go. And that's the best thing, is it doesn't overstay its welcome. It knows it's a 3 or 4 hour game, just as short as the first Doom was. You'll go back and you'll play it on different difficulties if you want to. You'll find secrets. There's like 35 different hidden skulls to find. So yeah, it's cool.
Well, Matt, I think you've carried this show as long as I wanted to go.
Perfect.
And we're going to leave before we overstay our welcome.
Perfect. Like Butcher.
You can find a whole bunch of crap on a90skid.com. You can find me on Twitter at GameThinkTalk.
You can find me on Twitter at SGC64. Or at SGC64Matt. Sorry.
Apology accepted.
It's okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Right on.